It's great. It's wonderful from a weather perspective, although challenging because we've got 6 states of weather to cover.
Right.
And there can be days, it's certainly not uncommon to have days when you'll have temperatures in the 20s and 30s in Maine and in the 70s in Connecticut. And you've got the entire population wanting to get the forecast, but you need to make sure that you do that for 6 states. So there's a lot of time that goes into the forecast, and especially when you're covering such a large area.
What's the tricks of the trade? What are some of the things that you use to forecast the weather?
Well, one of the biggest tools that we have for forecasting are the computer models, and you hear about that all the time. The big thing to remember about computer models, and sometimes I think even meteorologists can forget this, is that it's actually the term for them is computer model guidance, meaning they guide you to the forecast, as opposed to a computer model forecast. And what I mean by that is a lot of times you'll hear folks talking about, oh yeah, well the computer models are showing this or showing that. Well, that's okay, but really as a meteorologist, our job is to decipher what the weather's going to be like, to use that as guidance. So that's one big kind of trick to the trade, or the computers. Technology has improved tremendously. I mean, you go back about 10 years ago, and really, I mean, a 3-4 day forecast was something that was good. You had a couple of 5-day forecasts around. Now you can at least forecast a weather pattern, warmer than normal, cooler than normal, drier or wetter than normal, out to about 16, 20 days reliably in terms of that pattern, and even longer than that if you're looking at a kind of a global scale or region by region. In terms of what we like to see, which is the exact temperatures, highs and lows, timing of precipitation, it's still probably about a 36-hour science when it comes down to those kind of intimate details.
And a lot of it is interpretation. I guess it's more of an art than a science, or would you disagree with that?
I would say it's both, because when you study meteorology and go to school for it, you'll learn all the equations that make the atmosphere work. So there is a lot of science that's involved with it, but at the same time, you're right, there's a lot of interpretation that's involved as well, and that's why you can have 10 different meteorologists with 10 different forecasts, which I think sometimes probably for the public can be a little bit kind of disheartening. You know, you'd like to just tell me what the weather's going to be.
Right.
But that's, again, at the same time, that's what kind of distinguishes some from others, is that especially you can see it in snowstorms. But it's one of those things where if you see the potential for a big storm a week out, how much do you really want to get people up in arms and get people ready to go for this storm when it's so much can change over the course of a week? So a lot of times with these extended forecasts, what I'll say anyway in my forecast is, we're watching the chance for a storm, in another 5 days, but certainly there's a lot that can happen between now and then. And I think it's kind of that honesty that has to be there in all the forecasts,
Let's face it, most people will remember the bad predictions as opposed to the good ones.
You're right, yeah.
Now, is there any particular time of the year that it's harder to predict than others?
Absolutely. What drives our weather patterns is something called the jet stream. You've probably heard of that before. It's kind of this fast river of air upstairs in the atmosphere, and it steers our storm systems along. It acts as a thermostat between cold air and warm air. So basically what happens is that there are 2 times of the year when that jet stream changes, the spring and the fall. In the wintertime, you're set in your pattern, you're locked in your cold pattern here in the Northeast. In the summertime, we're locked in usually that warmer pattern. It's the spring and fall where that jet stream is bouncing all over the place. And when you're dealing with something that acts on a global pattern, such as the jet stream, it makes big differences. Again, that 50 to 100 miles is going to matter a lot. And so that's when we see our biggest errors, spring and fall. Right here in Haverhill, for example, you get a northeast wind that's coming in off of the Atlantic Ocean in the springtime. Our water temperatures are only in the mid-40s. So you're looking at a day that maybe would have been 65, 75 degrees. You better go for 40s and clouds because you're bringing in all that marine air right off the ocean.
What's the most important thing to know for somebody who wants to get into either meteorology or broadcasting or both?
I'm a big believer that one of the most important things, and this especially goes toward kids or teenagers who are looking to get involved with this, or even if you're a young adult who's still deciding on your career path and you're deciding what you'd like to do. The biggest thing I would say is stay devoted and dedicated to your dreams and don't give up. And what I mean by that is, let's put it this way: my 2 weakest subjects in school were math and physics. The two most important subjects for weather, for meteorology anyway, as a major, are math and physics. So it was a big struggle for me personally. I failed math a couple of times, calculus in college, and I'm not afraid to say it because my point in telling folks that is that it's one of those things where I think it's kind of a natural human tendency that if we fail to say, well, hey, I gave it a shot, you know. But I think it's so much more important to say, oh, you know, it didn't work out that time. I'm going to get up and I'm going to try it again. In terms of meteorology in particular, the math and the physics do help, but hey, if you got a strength in reading or something like that, why not read some books about the weather? You know, why not kind of get an understanding for the theories? And that's what I ended up doing. You know, if you can understand the principles through your strengths, then you can make up for your weaknesses. In terms of if you want to become a meteorologist, if you're watching this show and thinking about that, in order to be officially a meteorologist, you do need your 4-year degree, your Bachelor's of Science degree in meteorology. And there's a number of schools across the country that offer those programs.
What triggered you to take on meteorology? Why?
That's a great question. You know, I grew up an only child. I don't have any brothers or sisters. I was the spoiled only brat. And, and growing up, I always had a love for the weather, but I never really knew it because I never had anyone to compare with. So, for example, I've been tracking hurricanes since I was probably about 6 or 7.
Yeah.
I would have a hurricane tracking chart that I sent in to the National Weather Service, and they sent it back, and I would follow along with the National Weather Service NOAA Weather Radio. They'll kind of give you the advisories on hurricanes. So I would track it along. Never realized that not all 6, 7, 8-year-olds were doing that. I just figured that was the norm. I made my own 5-day forecast when I was about 10 or 11. The way I did that was I would cut out of the local paper, I would cut out the weather maps that would be in there. I'd have the lows and the highs and the temperatures. Then I'd put them in a photo album. I'd watch the storm systems move, and I'd watch how they progress and say, okay, and I'd close my eyes and kind of imagine where they were going to go next.
Right.
But I still planned that whole time growing up on being a doctor. I think what got me hooked on meteorology was Hurricane Gloria in '85, but it did not change the fact that I wanted to be a doctor. In fact, everybody who knew me and my family knew I was going to be a doctor. I went to high school with that intention. It wasn't until my senior year of high school that I said, you know, wait a minute. Maybe not every kid was making his own 5-day forecast. You know, maybe this is something I really have a true passion for. And then still the whole concept, and this is going to sound probably a little weird, but the whole concept of doing what you love as a job just didn't seem to fit at first.
Yeah.
And then I thought about more, and I said, why shouldn't I do what I love for a job? What a wonderful thing to do. So that's when I kind of made my decision that that was what I wanted to do for a career. In terms of the broadcasting side and the TV side of things, I think that was almost by default. And what I mean by that is just that growing up, that was my exposure to the weather. And I think for most of us, our main exposure to the weather is what we see on television. So that was just kind of the first thing that figured into my mind. I did a couple of internships with the National Weather Service down in Camp Springs, Maryland. Geniuses that work there. I mean, talk about being on the cutting edge of technology. Talk about just all, you know, being on the up and up of meteorological techniques. And I learned a ton there. And there, you know, maybe someday, far down the line, you know, it'd be something that I would love to get back into again. But certainly, you know, being in broadcasting has just been wonderful.